Hi everybody, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Chapter 24, New Jerusalem. The opening above the saints grew larger, and Rayford felt himself suddenly drawn toward it at great speed, as millions of saints from around the world streamed toward the centre of the glass ceiling. Those, like Rayford and Chaim, who had arrived first, were drawn through the big opening in the ceiling. Rayford looked down and could see clouds below him now. They must be several miles high up and still rising. Even after they passed through the opening, they continued to rise at rapid rate, allowing room for what looked like an unending cloud of saints and angels to follow them. Inside the structure, Rayford discovered that there was no sense of up or down. It was like another world, but with total weightlessness. There was no shortage of oxygen. If needed, their new bodies were functioning on oxygen at all. Suddenly, Rayford felt guilty. He had become so distracted by the city that he had forgotten about Jesus, the one who had obviously made it all happen. "Don't let it bother you," said someone or something. It was like the voice spoke inside his head. Nevertheless, Rayford spun round and saw an angel smiling at him. "You'll have plenty of time to meet with the Lord personally," he thought he heard the angel say, although Rayford could not see the man's lips moving. "Can you?" Rayford began, but the answer came back before he could finish. The sentence. "That's why I'm here. It's my job to show you around and to answer your questions." The two men, for the angel looked to be quite human, except for a higher degree of brilliance in his robe and countenance. The two men were still moving at great speed through the vastness of the city that they had entered into moments earlier. The crowd was thinning out, and it appeared that each saint had been joined by one angelic guide. Rayford's senses were overwhelmed with all that had happened in just a few moments of time. He had been resurrected from what seemed like a deep sleep, returned to perfect health and youth, shot into space without a vehicle or a spacesuit, witnessed momentarily the return of Jesus in the skies above Jerusalem, and then been swept into a whole new world inside a giant glass pyramid, where everything defied the laws of gravity. It's approximately 1,500 miles high, the angel said, as he read his student's mind. Rayford's head was being filled with information on where he was and what was happening as quickly as he could process it. Millions of saints from around the world have been resurrected and flown here at great speed. Jesus is out there waiting to be seen by each of you before you enter New Jerusalem. Yes, New Jerusalem. That's the name of this city. We have been busy preparing for this exciting moment. When everyone's inside, by sundown in Israel, we'll gather for the wedding party. No, it won't be dark here. God's presence lights the city constantly. You no longer need to sleep, so the party can go on for weeks in Earth time without let up. The crowd, there'll be no problem. You'll hear them as clearly as you're hearing me now. There'll be screens if you wish to see him up close, but it is not his body that we worship, it's his truth and power. We've planned plenty of music and food and dancing, a lot of celebrating. You don't know how much we up here have been looking forward to this. This is just so amazing, Rayford exclaimed, relieved that his angel had allowed him to express just a tiny bit of what he was feeling. We understand your need to express praise, the angel said. We have the same need ourselves. You'll love the sing-alongs. A single it will be the single greatest act of praise in all history. It it really is going to be exciting. Rayford had a strange urge to hug his angel, and at that instant his angel reached out to hug him. Call me Bob, he said, and Rayford registered surprise at such an angelic name. Rayford registered surprise at such an unangelic name. A bit common, you think? Asked Bob. Actually, names are not a big deal up here. We never get lost, and people know when you're being addressed personally, like I'm doing with you right now. But Bob will do if you feel more comfortable using a name. See, this is why you need to read Enoch, because they do have names, proper names, angelic names. Thanks, Bob, Rayford responded. Oh, man. You see, it's just getting silly now, like... Thanks, Bob, Rayford responded, and then his thoughts turned to Irene. She's here. I'm not going to say Bob, I'm just going to say the angel. She's here, the angel reassured him. You'll see her later, but you'll also come to love everyone here as much as you love her and the Lord. Why, he'll be the greatest love of all. Rayford could insistently see the truth in what the angel was saying. On earth, he had a special relationship with Irene. She was his personal responsibility, but here, everyone existed to love and please God. The marriage party, as they called it, was a celebration of their corporate union with God. The euphoria that Rayford had been experiencing since he first rose sleepily up onto his knees there in the Temple Mount enclosure was greater than any pleasure he could ever remember having experienced back on Earth, including sex. He did not even miss Irene now, or feel impatient about seeing her. He knew instinctively that they were one already, not only with each other, but with all the saints throughout history. They were one in their worship with God. They were entering into a new marriage, a marriage to God. Rayford's mind took another turn, and once again, the angel turned with him. Back on Earth, the angel asked. They're pretty upset. I can tell you that, he said with a laugh. Old Dang Chow is trying to tell them that we're an alien. Old Dang Chow is trying to tell them that we're an alien starship coming to destroy the Earth. Guess we are, in a way. But he doesn't dare mention God. If he did, maybe they'll all would see the futility in fighting us and just repent. Israel's in a mess at the moment. Nearly 7,000 people dead already from the quake. But Dang Chow is untouched by it. He doesn't think of anyone but himself. Right now, he's screaming for military support from every country on Earth. Fighter jets, nukes, rocket missiles, anything they can find to blow a few holes in our outer shield. Can they? No, not a chance. It wouldn't matter if they could. The glass isn't really our shield, God is. We just put it there for effect. Same as all the gold and the precious stones you see everywhere around here. Pretty, isn't it? The beautiful structures in Jerusalem had contributed to Rayford's overall feeling of pleasure. There were perfumes that breathed peace into his spirit too, and a kind of subconscious awareness of music humming inside his head. A river of water flowed this way and that through the vast city, but it flowed without banks to hold it in. It was either in a transparent channel or just held together by its own surface tension. Rayford reached out to touch it. Sure enough, it had no outer covering. It was wet and cold. There were areas of vegetation that had the feel of jungles without a jungle floor. You could move up and down and through the beautiful flowers, ferns, vines, and other foliage. Plants tended to lack stalks, although they were beautiful and ornate leaves and a few vines that laced individual blooms together. The precious stones that Bob had referred to were more or less strewn along the path. Structures within the pyramid were not exactly buildings in the sense of a building on earth. There was a little need for walls or floors, as people had nothing to hide, and they were able to view others from above and below as easy as they could from side to side. Some semi-transparent structures did serve to separate general areas of the city, so that activities taking place on one side of the walls would not disturb activities on the other side. Precious stones and plants featured on the partitions. If there was one thing that the saints found difficult about life in Jerusalem, it was living without their normal concepts of time. You could not talk about tonight or tomorrow or how many days until something would happen, because you couldn't talk about tonight or tomorrow or how many days until something would happen, because there were no nights and people did not sleep. They would, however, take time to recline amongst the many gardens and just soak in the peace and beauty of their new environment from time to time. In Earth's days, the marriage party went on for several weeks. Rayford met up with Irene, Elaine, Chloe and Raimi. In fact, all of the original Jessens and the 12 judges. They compared notes on what had happened while they were apart, what their reactions had been when the great resurrection began, and what they had so far learned of life in New Jerusalem. "We're going to rule the world when the battle is over," Raimi announced. He was 22 years old now, and he would continue to age in New Jerusalem until he was approximately 30. The assignments, he said, will be given out after the celebrations. Rayford prepared them for the responsibility that they could have in only major assignments compared to the ones that they had carried out during the last 7 years. It always seems that we get slack when we're leading, and God spots the greater faithfulness of humble followers. So we'll probably see some of the little people given the top jobs here, he said. Neville was there too, and he had some exciting news to announce about something he had learned from his angel. "You know how we were able to send and receive emails without a service provider," he said. "Well, it was all being processed through a control room up here. The whole place can disappear into another dimension. It was out there all that time tapping into the World Wide Web to process our email. That's why we never received a bill from Web Wonders after they destroyed it. Another thing, it was the guys who vaporized the Web Wonders office, not Deng Chao. They did it so Deng Chao's men couldn't get our files. I've been learning so much about how things work up here. It's not magical or anything like that. There's just a lot of laws and physics that people back on Earth haven't learned yet. Things like how to overcome gravity and how to read minds. Even our new bodies operate much like our old ones did. Just newer models. They don't need sleep, they don't age, and they're immune to disease. We'll still eat and drink, but most of our power comes from God himself. It comes to us through the light that fills his pyramid. Outside the pyramid, we would still age, the same as anyone else. There's just so much to learn," he exclaimed. "Isn't it great?" Each saint found delight in something different. Mary loved observing the changes in others now that they were all young and healthy. She found as much pleasure in watching and listening to Neville as she found by what was by what he was learning of divine physics. Just looking at Sheila Armitage and Mary Teresa, who were also 30 years old now, intrigued Mary. Everyone was so beautiful and so full of energy. She wanted to talk to everyone and to hear their stories about what God had done for them. Fran, Lewis, Mike and Martin all got into playing games with their new flying skills. They were like children, although they had been cautioned a couple of times about the dangers of reckless flying. Matthew Baker and John Dorman spent a lot of time in the archives going through videos and other records of their own lives and of the lives of others. They were able to gain a better appreciation of what was happening spiritually at various times in their lives. They would locate a time when they prayed for something and then press a button and get an account of what had been the actual effect of the prayers. They were impressed with how God and his angels had managed to work around the intricacies of each person's free will and other natural restrictions that God had placed on himself. Reinhard's greatest pleasure was just in wandering around the city, examining the vegetation, the decorations, and some of the strange animal-like creatures that lived there. There was obviously more than enough to keep everyone fully occupied and happy for the next 1,000 years, which was how long they would be ruling over the world. What was to happen after that, they would worry about when the 1,000 years were drawing to a close. But in the meantime, they would all have duties to perform in ruling the world under the guidance of Jesus and his angels for the next 1,000 years. Even while we're celebrating, God was pouring out his wrath on the world below. All the suffering the saints had just been through was nothing compared to what was happening outside all that time. The armies of the world were gathering their forces together for one final assault on New Jerusalem. Deng Chao had a plan to fly nuclear weapons through the same opening that the saints had used. But the saints were going to join with the angels in blocking that assault. An assault that is more popularly known as the Battle of Armageddon. End of chapter. Zion Ben Jonah writes, Revelation 21 gives a detailed description of New Jerusalem after it all lands on the planet Earth, i.e. after the Battle of Armageddon. We have not bothered in this book to detail the gore that accompanies the 7 vials of the wrath. You can read about it in Revelation chapter 16. Unfortunately, despite all that God does to get their attention, the world still does not repent. Instead, they become more bitter against him. They eventually unite in a fierce war against God himself. See the next chapter. The Bible tells us that there will be no marriage in heaven. Matthew 22:30, Luke 12:25, and Luke 20:34. Did I say Luke twice? Matthew 22:30, Mark 12:25, and Luke 20:34. This is a bit hard for people to imagine, as marriage seems to be the closest thing to heaven that most of us will ever experience here on earth, although some would say that is the closest thing to hell too. However, just as we cannot fathom how God could do many of the things that he has done, i.e. creation itself, so it is hard for us to comprehend the far greater pleasures that he is yet to give to those who put their faith in him. The Bible tells us that God will provide the light in Jerusalem. The physical presence of Jesus ministering to millions of different individuals is hard to picture, but through a combined assistance of the light, God's spiritual presence, and his heavenly hosts, the angels, Jesus will apparently be able to meet those needs of all his faithful followers without any problems. So there we go. Uh, Look, as I said, like, read the Bible for yourself. You can read all of this in Book of Revelations, but the reason for me reading this book was to help paint a picture in your mind. And the main reason was as well for the characters, the stories, the reactions. But you can read it all for yourself. I wouldn't actually focus on Revelations just itself. I would focus on reading and understanding. Read the prophets, you know, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. You probably already know the Gospels, but read the like I said before as well. Like read the minor prophets as well, like Joel, Obadiah, Micah, Zechariah, so on and so on. I want to thank you all for listening. If you followed the story, I apologize again. My reading couldn't be smoother, but I haven't been reading out loud for long. I mean, I would read out loud in school and for work, but reading a book is totally different, and it's got a couple of typos in there as well. And anyway, it's all practice. Anyway, it's all practice. Reading this book out loud, reading the Bible out loud, it's all practice for bedtime stories with Dad. Because that's what it's all about. It's all about raising your children, bring them up in the way. When they're older, they will turn back to it, basically. It's all about passing on the scriptures, the love and fear of the Most High to our children. And that's why I wanted to go into Chronicles. But yeah, thank you for listening. Merci. Muito obrigado. Gracias. Evaristo. Grazie mille. Ciao. Dziękuję. Cześć. Благодаря. Спасибо.